Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in 1 Chronicles chapter 9, verse 1 through chapter 10, verse 14. Genealogical records were kept for all Israel. They are recorded in the scroll of the kings of Israel. The people of Judah were carried away to Babylon because of their unfaithfulness. The first to resettle on their property and in their cities were some Israelites, priests, Levites, and temple servants. Some from the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and Ephraim, and Manasseh settled in Jerusalem. These settlers included Uzziah, son of Mihud, son of Omri, son of Imri, son of Bani, who was a descendant of Perez, son of Judah. From the Shilonites, Asaiah, the firstborn, and his sons. From the descendants of Zerah, Jeuel. Their relatives numbered 690. From the descendants of Benjamin, Salu, son of Meshullam, son of Hodaviah, son of Hasanua, Ibneiah, son of Jeroham, Elah, son of Uzi, son of Mikri, and Meshullam, son of Shephatiah, son of Reuel, son of Ibnijah. The relatives listed in their genealogical records numbered 956. All these men were leaders of their families. From the priests, Jediah, Jehoiarib, Jachin, Azariah, son of Hilkiah, son of Meshullam, son of Zadok, son of Meraioth, son of Ahitub, the leader in God's temple. Adiah, son of Jeroham, son of Pashur, son of Malchijah, and Messiah, son of Adiel, son of Jezerah, son of Meshullam, son of Meshillemeth, son of Immer. The relatives who were leaders of their families numbered 1,760. They were capable men who were assigned to carry out the various tasks of service in God's temple. From the Levites, Shemaiah, son of Hashab, son of Azrikam, son of Hashabiah, a descendant of Merari. Bakar, Harish, Gallo, Mattaniah, son of Micah, son of Zikri, son of Asaph. Obadiah, son of Shemaiah, son of Gallo, son of Jeduthun, and Berechiah, son of Asa, son of Elkanah, who lived among the settlements of the Netophathites. The gatekeepers were Shallum, Akab, Talmon, Hyman, and their brothers. Shallum was the leader. He serves to this day at the king's gate on the east. These were the gatekeepers from the camp of the descendants of Levi. Shallum, son of Korah, son of Abiasaph, son of Korah, and his relatives from his family, the Korahites, were assigned to guard the entrance to the sanctuary. Their ancestors had guarded the entrance to the Lord's dwelling place. Phinehas, son of Eleazar, had been their leader in earlier times, and the Lord was with him. Zechariah, son of Meshelemiah, was the guard at the entrance to the meeting tent. All those selected to be gatekeepers at the entrances numbered 212. Their names were recorded in the genealogical records of their settlements. David and Samuel the prophet had appointed them to their positions. They and their descendants were assigned to guard the gates of the Lord's sanctuary, that is, the tabernacle. The gatekeepers were posted on all four sides, east, west, north, and south. The relatives who lived in their settlements came from time to time and served with them for 7-day periods. The four head gatekeepers, who were Levites, were assigned to guard the storerooms and treasuries in God's sanctuary. They would spend the night in their posts all around God's sanctuary, for they were assigned to guard it and would open it with a key every morning. Some of them were in charge of the articles used by those who served. They counted them when they brought them in and when they brought them out. Some of them were in charge of the equipment and articles of the sanctuary, as well as the flour, wine, olive oil, incense, and spices. But some of the priests mixed the spices. Mattaniah, a Levite, the firstborn son of Shallum the Korahite, was in charge of baking the bread for offerings. Some of the Kohathites, their relatives, were in charge of preparing the bread that is displayed each Sabbath. The musicians and Levite family leaders stayed in rooms at the sanctuary and were exempt from other duties, for day and night they had to carry out their assigned tasks. These were the family leaders of the Levites, as listed in their genealogical records. They lived in Jerusalem. Jael, the father of Gibeon, lived in Gibeon. His wife was Maacah. His firstborn son was Adon, followed by Zur, Kish, Baal-Ner, Nadab, Gedor, Ahio, Zechariah, and Mikloth. Mikloth was the father of Shimeam. They also lived near their relatives in Jerusalem. Ner was the father of Kish, and Kish was the father of Saul. Saul was the father of Jonathan, Malchishua, Abinadab, and Ishbaal. The son of Jonathan, Meribbaal, who was the father of Micah. The sons of Micah, Pithon, Melech, Teriah, and Ahaz. Ahaz was the father of Jerah, and Jerah was the father of Alameth, Asmaveth, Zimri. Zimri was the father of Moza, and Moza was the father of Benaiah. His son was Rephaiah, whose son was Eliasah, whose son was Azel. Azel had 6 sons. Azrikam his firstborn, followed by Ishmael, Shariah, Obadiah, and Hanan. These were the sons of Azel. Now the Philistines fought against Israel. The Israelites fled before the Philistines, and many of them fell dead on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines stayed right on the heels of Saul and his sons. They struck down Saul's son Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. The battle was thick around Saul. The archers spotted him and wounded him. Saul told his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and stab me with it. Otherwise these uncircumcised people will come and torture me." But his armor-bearer refused to do so, because he was very afraid. So Saul took the sword and fell on it. When his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell on his sword and died. So Saul and his 3 sons died. His whole household died together. When all the Israelites who were in the valley saw that the army had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their cities and fled. The Philistines came and occupied them. The next day, when the Philistines came to strip loot from the corpses, they discovered Saul and his sons lying dead on Mount Gilboa. They stripped his corpse and then carried off his head and his armor. They sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines, proclaiming the news to their idols and their people. They placed his armor in the temple of their gods and hung his head in the temple of Dagon. When all the residents of Jabesh Gilead heard about everything the Philistines had done to Saul, all the warriors went and recovered the bodies of Saul and his sons and brought them to Jabesh. They buried their remains under the oak tree in Jabesh and fasted for 7 days. So Saul died because he was unfaithful to the Lord and did not obey the Lord's instructions. He even tried to conjure up underworld spirits. He did not seek the Lord's guidance, so the Lord killed him and transferred the kingdom to David, son of Jesse. Interesting. So you've got the resettlers in Israel here for the first bit. But Judah was carried away captive to Babylon because of their unfaithfulness. In one sentence, the chronicler reminds us that it was not the clash of empires or the intrigues of the geopolitical scene that doomed the kingdom of Judah. It was their unfaithfulness to God. If they had remained faithful, God would have protected them amid the rise and fall of 100 powerful empires. You also have descriptions here of the sons of Levi who were working in the temple complex. There were 3 categories of workers at the temple who had the work of restoring the temple and its worship in the days of Ezra. Priests were the descendants of Aaron, who had the right to offer sacrifice and take care of the holy place in the temple. Levites were the much broader class of religious workers who served in many ways: practical, artistic, and spiritual. The Nethinim were special servants given to the temple. The temple servants were literally given ones. They might consist of captives who had been spared, but enslaved to temple service. Early Hebrew examples include certain Midianite women or the people of Gibeon, but their organization as a class is credited to David. Yeah, I think you have, for the Nethinim there, an example is that Joshua bit where the people were afraid of, the Gibeonites were afraid of Joshua, so they made a treaty with him, and so duplicitously, in that they pretended to be far away, and they were like, "Oh, we heard you were really great from a long way away, and we're totally not your neighbors. So make a treaty with us not to harm us." And like, okay, that sounds good. And then they discovered that they were neighbors, and so Joshua made them hewers of stone. Well, no, like haulers of water and choppers of wood, type thing. So that must have included like a temple service. I mean, that sea had to get filled somehow. You also had gatekeepers. This describes the reinstitution of the organization of the temple work and workers in the early days of the Second Temple. They were anxious to organize things in the same manner as King David did originally. It also denotes that there was definite organization and division of labor among the Levites. When the morning broke, it called to duty first the porters, who opened the house of God, and then after due ablution, each band of white-robed Levites began its special service. There was no running to and fro in disorder, nor intrusion to one another's office, no clashing in duty, no jealousy of each other's ministry. It was enough to know that each had been appointed to his task and was asked to be faithful to it. The right ordering of the whole depended on the punctuality, fidelity, and conscientiousness of each. Yeah, and then you have a little bit of the genealogy of Saul here. And after the genealogy of Saul, you have the death of Saul on Mount Gilboa, where the Philistines are fighting against Israel. And Saul is wounded and seeks death and does it himself. And when the men of Israel saw that Saul was dead, they retreated. Oh, and then they post his body up in the temple of their god, Dagon. Yeah. But then you have Jabesh Gilead acting very valiantly and breaking through, and taking his body down and his armor with it, I think. So they're recorded here in their faithfulness. Carrying on, Acts chapter 27, verses 21 through 44. Since many of them had no desire to eat, this is when things are looking bad and they have like no hope for survival. So since many of them had no desire to eat, Paul stood up among them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me and not put out to sea from Crete, thus avoiding this damage and loss. And now I advise you to keep up your courage, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only the ship will be lost. For last night an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve came to me and said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar, and God has graciously granted you the safety of all who are sailing with you. Therefore keep up your courage, man, for I have faith in God that it will be just as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island.' When the 14th night had come, while we were being driven across the Adriatic Sea, about midnight, the sailors suspected they were approaching some land. They took soundings and found the water was 20 fathoms deep. When they had sailed a little farther, they took soundings again and found it was 15 fathoms deep. Because they were afraid that they would run aground on the rocky coast, they threw out 4 anchors from the stern and wished for day to appear. Then when the sailors tried to escape from the ship, and were lowering the ship's boat into the sea, pretending that they were going to put out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, 'Unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved.' Then the soldiers cut the ropes of the ship's boat and let it drift away. As day was about to dawn, Paul urged them all to take some food, saying, "Today is the 14th day. You have been in suspense and have gone without food. You have eaten nothing. Therefore, I urge you to take some food, for this is important for your survival, for not one of you will lose a hair from his head." After he had said this, Paul took bread and gave thanks to God in front of them all, broke it, and began to eat. So all of them were encouraged and took food themselves. We were in all 276 persons on the ship. When they had eaten enough to be satisfied, they lightened the ship by throwing the wheat into the sea. When day came, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach, where they decided to run the ship aground if they could. So they slipped the anchors and left them in the sea, at the same time loosening the linkage that bound the steering oars together. Then they hoisted the foresail to the wind and steered toward the beach, but they encountered a patch of cross currents and ran the ship aground. The bow stuck fast and could not be moved, but the stern was being broken up by the force of the waves. Now the soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, so that none of them would escape by swimming away. But the centurion, wanting to save Paul's life, prevented them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and get to land, and the rest were to follow, some on planks and some on pieces of the ship. And in this way all were brought safely to land. Really limping along here. Yeah. So many of them were despairing at a certain point where they had tossed the ship's gear overboard, and they didn't even want to eat. In 27:21, since many of them had no desire to eat, Paul stood up and encouraged them. So things were looking pretty bad. If you're going to commit suicide by starvation, things are looking pretty bad. But God encouraged Paul, and Paul encouraged them, and they did eventually come to land there. And then they cut the ship's boat, that is the life raft, essentially, out and let it drift away, which was pretty interesting. That that the people, that the centurions had such faith in Paul that they cutting the life raft away. And also, the soldiers were planning on killing the prisoners so that none of them would escape by swimming away. The idea being that these centurions are given this task to guard these prisoners at the cost of their own lives. That is, if any of them were to escape, it would cost the soldiers their lives. And it's impossible to keep track of prisoners as the ship is going down and breaking up. So the idea would be to kill all the prisoners so that none of them would escape by swimming away. But then the centurion waived this and got them all safely alive. So pretty cool. Wonder if Guzik has anything here. So they spent 14 days in this. They spent 2 entire weeks in the misery and terror of the storm. Yeah, that's a long time to be on a rocking ship with no hope of survival. The sailors didn't care for the passengers. Seeing a chance to save their own lives in the darkness, they hoped to abandon the ship, leaving the passengers. Paul knew two reasons why they had to stay together. First, the ship's passengers desperately needed the crew's expertise, and it would be fatal if the crew abandoned the passengers. Second, Paul probably sensed that God's promise to give him the lives of the whole ship's company assumed that they would stay together. Yeah. They didn't recognize the land. They did not know it at first, but they came to an island called Malta. The place where the ship came aground is now called St. Paul's Bay. Only the rarest conjunction of favorable circumstances could have brought about such a fortunate ending to the apparent hopelessness of this situation. All these circumstances are united in St. Paul's Bay. If they missed Malta, there would have been nothing for it but to hold on for 200 miles until they struck the Tunisian coast, and no one could have expected the ship to survive that long. Yeah. It's just reading through a couple of sea stories lately, and just sometimes you only get one chance, and you can't miss a body of land, or else you'll just drift off into sea with the momentum, and there's no going back, especially with everything thrown overboard. So, carrying on, Psalm chapter 8, verses 1 through 9. O Lord, our Lord, how magnificent is your reputation throughout the earth. You reveal your majesty in the heavens above. From the mouths of children and nursing babies, you have ordained praise on account of your adversaries, so that you might put an end to the vindictive enemy. When I look up to the heavens, which your fingers made, and see the moon and the stars which you set in place, of what importance is the human race that you should notice them? Of what importance is mankind that you should pay attention to them, and make them a little less than the heavenly beings? You grant mankind honor and majesty. You appoint them to rule over your creation. You have placed everything under their authority, including all the sheep and cattle, as well as the wild animals, the birds in the sky, the fish in the sea, and everything that moves through the currents of the seas. O Lord, our Lord, how magnificent is your reputation throughout the earth. Yeah. The fact that the Lord has deigned to recognize us is a great honor. And not just recognize, but also call us sons, which is mind-blowing. Finally, Proverbs chapter 18, verses 23 and 24. A poor person makes supplications, but a rich man answers harshly. A person who has friends may be harmed by them, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Amen. Yeah. The poor man uses entreaties. It is sadly true that often when a person is poor in money or influence, all they can do is beg for favor and justice. Speaks supplications, comes in a submissive manner, uses a low language. As a broken man, how much more should we do so to God, creeping into his presence with utmost humility and reverence? The rich man or woman can speak boldly, even rudely, because they have resources of money and influence. Solomon here described the world as it is, not as it should be. We sense in the proverb a quiet plea to make a better world than what is described in the proverb. A man who has friends must himself be friendly. This is basic but an often ignored principle. If you want friends, you should be friendly to others. There's a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Even when a man has friends, there's something that will disappoint in human friendship. The flesh and blood friends of this world are important and a blessing, but we need the friend who sticks closer than a brother, Jesus Christ himself, who calls us no longer servants, but friends. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day. Bye.